Now let's head back to Kenya, where the country's parliament has passed a law reducing the VAT on fuel from 16% to 8%. Now, just before that session got underway, some MPs caused some chaos, calling for 0%. Parliament will later review more proposals on levies for goods, including fuel, kerosene, bottled water and mobile money transfers.
Any given call rate will increase.
It will affect everything. If you reduce VAT from 16% to 8% and add taxes on phone credit and other items, the people will suffer because our salaries have not increased.
It all impacts. Any increment on fuel affects every sector of the economy, and that's the main challenge.
What we are seeing, that type of increment, there's something fishy going on. Just needed to be suspended and remain the way it was before.
I don't agree with the bill. The MPs should go back to the drawing board and fix it.
Well, let's break all this down with Ken Gichinga. He is a chief economist at Mentoria Consulting. Very welcome to the studio, Ken. Now, let's start by breaking down what happened today. Suddenly a tough and delicate situation for MPs. It's going to be a tough balancing act for them in terms of these proposed austerity and tax measures. Now, what do you make of today's attempt to debate on reducing VAT on fuel from 16 to 8%? It certainly seems like President Kenyatta has got the majority on this.
He does, but you know, Uche, I've watched so many parliamentary debates in my life, but I have to say this was one of the most contentious bills that I've ever seen debated. Words were said that could not be unsaid, and people are almost coming to blows because of the issues at hand. So for me, this was a very contentious bill. I think, I don't think it was a clear majority, although it's been reported in that sense, but if you watch the live proceedings, for me, I felt it was a very, very difficult bill to pass through. That said, it is going for the president's signature to be passed into law. But I really think that they need to understand how this has gone through the House and the anger that it has generated throughout the entire process, because it seems the anger is palpable, and it seems that there are some deeper economic issues that have not found an expression. And if they don't, it's going to come up in another way in the future.
Now, a lot of different news coming out. There's some rumors that there could be a second vote because people oppose whether he really did get the majority on this first vote. What are your thoughts personally? I mean, you're watching it along with us together. So what are your thoughts? Could we possibly see a second vote tomorrow?
I was surprised they didn't use technology for the vote, because for such a contentious issues where the ayes and the nays are equally very vocal, I would have imagined that technology should have been the mode of voting as opposed to who says louder, because everybody will shout it louder. So for me, I didn't see a clear voice coming through, but that say they say that there was a majority. So for me, a lot of people say there was a democratic deficit in this entire process, but I mean, at the end of the day, they have to show how many numbers were for it and how many were against it. So for me, I really wish Parliament was there to represent the people. I understand the parliamentarians who had been whipped up to vote in a certain way. And for me, that disconnect really needs to be understood, because if future parliamentary sessions will play out like we saw today, then we're going to have a very difficult 5 years.
And there was certainly a lot of shouting today. Now, despite the fact that we've seen this VAT on fuel pass now, allegedly, President Kenyatta also proposed to raise levies on cash transfers, housing, airtime and data, kerosene, as well as confectionery items and chocolate, surprisingly. Now, are we likely to see these passed, or are we likely to see another contentious process possibly tomorrow?
White chocolate, for that matter. I think the big topic was on VAT. I think for me, people going home today and seeing what happened today, I don't think we'll see a lot more resistance moving forward, because the issue of chocolate and confectionery, I mean, those are luxury goods which not every Kenyan enjoys. But VAT on fuel really touches every common mwananchi, and that is why it was as contentious as it is. So I don't think it will be as vocal. I don't think you will see a fist fight. But for me, I think a lot of people will look at today as a turning point in our economic history.
Now, as much as it's going to be painful for the Kenyan people, at the center of all this lies that $9 billion debt service obligation that the government is facing. So some have suggested going back to the international market for funds if we don't see some of these tax proposals passed, if the government cannot come up with the revenue needed. What, for you, are the possible solutions for the government going forward?
It will be difficult to go to the international markets because most likely you'll get higher interest rates because of the situations on the ground. So refinancing at a cheaper interest rate is going to be much, much tricky. I think the options for the country really has to really think through about what are the key factors of production for Kenya. And Economics 101 tells you there are 4 factors of production. You have land, you have labor, you have capital, and you have entrepreneurship. And we really have to think through all 4 modes of production. If you talk about land, Kenya has so much idle land that could easily be put into production, and that land could be taxed, and that money could go into the government, and the government wouldn't have to borrow money from the international partners. So for me, I think we really need to think through and see what does the history of economic thought tell us about where to legitimately raise tax. And it's not on VAT. VAT is a quick fix because it's easy to apply, but what it actually does, it's a disincentive to enterprise, because people go home and they say, you know, instead of driving, I'll just stay at home, because driving is expensive, and that 7-8% that we are targeting as a GDP, it might not come to bear. We probably have to be at 5% for this year. So I think for me it's a quick fix. I think they quickly have to go back and really think through what's the economic model this country is running on, and what's the long-term sustainable way. And I think you can't escape those 4 factors of production.
Well, for now, Kenyans have to contend with this quick fix, essentially. How do you see this impacting the price of consumer goods, especially for the lower income Kenyans going forward?
I mean, they've already gone up. I don't even think it's a futuristic scenario.
How bad do you think it's
1,000 shillings today will get you 7.9 liters of fuel. That would have gotten you about 10 liters this time last year. So you already feel it right from the fuel pump. And that, what the direction fuel goes is the direction everything goes, because food prices will go up, because fuel affects every aspect of food production, of manufacturing, of even on the retail side. Everything that's being delivered to you has a fuel aspect to it. So the cost of living is already going up. They're telling us VAT, I mean, the inflation numbers will go up. But for me, when I really look at inflation, I don't think it's the 4% that we hear about. For me, it feels much higher.
Now, very quickly, how worried are you about Kenya's fiscal position right now? How worried? Give us a scale.
I mean, I'm worried about debt, excessive debt. And for me, I'm worried about why can't we think about how to legitimately raise domestic taxes so that we can depend on ourselves. And what does that involve? That involves the KRA, first of all, broadening the tax base, first of all, and making sure all those people who are evading really pay their fair share of their dues. Number 2, there's the issue of wastage. We've been told there's a lot of wastage, that there's room to cut a lot of excess fat in the public service. And lastly, the issue of corruption. All that money that has been stashed abroad, if it can be recovered. I mean, Theresa May was here the other day and she promised a lot of the money that's sitting in London will be returned to Kenya. That money, if it's returned, we're talking of things that in the orders of hundreds of billions, that could easily transform our roads, our hospitals, our schools. So for me, it's a 3-pronged attack. And I think that's how we need to really think about it.
Well, unfortunately, we have to leave it there. But thank you so much for joining us in the studio and discussing this topic. Of course, Ken Gichinga, he's a chief economist at Mentoria Consulting.